They mocked a black man in handcuffs, thinking he was just another criminal until he revealed he was the director of the FBI. The heavy door swung open with a loud creak. Darius walked in, his wrists cuffed tightly in front of him. His posture was upright, his gaze steady, even though every eye in the courtroom locked onto him with suspicion and contempt. Blake, the sheriff, leaned back lazily in his chair near the witness stand. He nudged the officer next to him, smirking. "Look at this guy." Blake muttered loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. "Bet he's got a rap sheet longer than this building." A few chuckles followed. One deputy, a tall guy with a shaved head, added, "Surprised he ain't running already." Darius caught every word but said nothing. He scanned the room calmly, noting faces, noting weapons, noting exits. His silence only fueled their assumptions. Across the courtroom, Harris, the prosecutor, stacked a thick folder of papers onto the table with a loud thud. His tie was sharp, his face sharper. "Let's make this quick," Harris said, glancing at Judge Mason, who nodded stiffly. "This one's obvious." Logan, Darius's defense attorney, a wiry man in his 30s, stood up and buttoned his jacket slowly. "Obvious." Logan's voice was calm, almost curious. "You mean to say you've already decided the verdict?" Harris didn't even look at him. When you see someone like that lurking around a crime scene, you don't exactly expect a choir boy. Judge Mason rapped her gavel lightly. "Enough. Proceed." Blake snorted from his seat. "Proceed hell. Just throw him in already." Muffled laughter again. The judge shot Blake a warning glare, but he leaned back, unbothered. Arms crossed over his chest, Logan turned to Darius and whispered, "You sure you want to stay quiet through this?" Darius's eyes didn't move from Harris. His voice was low but steady. "Let them show who they are first." Logan studied him for a moment. He had represented all kinds of men in this courtroom, guilty, innocent, confused, broken, but there was something different about Darius, a calm so deliberate, it felt dangerous. Harris rose and strode toward the center of the room, holding up a few blurry photos. "Here we have the defendant trespassing on a federal crime scene. Not only that, he resisted arrest, threatened my officers, and interfered with an ongoing investigation." He tossed the photos onto the table with a slap eye. Logan didn't even blink. "And what exactly makes you so sure he was interfering?" Logan asked, keeping his tone light. Blake barked a short laugh. "Because we told him to back off. And he didn't. Simple as that." Judge Mason tapped her gavel harder this time. "Order. This is a court of law, not a back-alley brawl." Darius finally turned his head slightly, meeting Blake's smirk with a gaze so cold and direct that Blake's grin faltered for a split second. But Blake doubled down. "You know," he said, loud and clear now, "I don't care what suit you throw on a guy like that. At the end of the day, you can't polish dirt." The words hung in the air. Even some of the officers who had been laughing earlier shifted uncomfortably. Logan tightened his jaw but said nothing yet. He was watching, waiting. Judge Mason's voice sliced through the tension. "Mr. Harris, proceed with your witness testimonies." Harris gave a satisfied nod. "Sheriff Blake, please approach the stand." Blake stood up with a swagger and shot Darius a smug glance before striding across the room. As Blake passed, Darius said quietly under his breath, barely loud enough for only Logan to hear, "They're building their own gallows." Logan raised an eyebrow. "Hope you know what you're doing." Darius's lips twitched in what could have been the ghost of a smile. "I always do." Across the room, Blake planted himself in the witness stand and, without waiting for permission, leaned in toward the microphone. Yeah, I was there. I saw the guy. Big, dark, aggressive look in his eye. You can't miss that kind of trouble coming. Harris nodded like it was the gospel truth. And what was he doing? Harris prompted. Blake shrugged dramatically. Prowling around, looking for something, maybe looking for a place to run. We told him to step back, but he got mouthy. Typical. Blake paused for effect, pretending to wipe imaginary sweat off his brow, playing to the gallery. Darius didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, every inch of him broadcasting a silent warning. You're digging your own hole. Judge Mason narrowed her eyes at Blake. Sheriff, stick to facts. No opinions. No dramatics. Blake grunted. Yeah, facts. Fact is, we had to cuff him before he caused any real damage. Across the aisle, Logan leaned forward, voice sharp. And what made you think he was a threat? Blake snorted. You serious look at him. The courtroom froze. Even Harris shifted slightly, as if realizing that Blake might have gone too far. Judge Mason's knuckles whitened around her gavel. But she didn't strike it yet. She let the words hang. Let the room feel the weight of them. Logan stood up slowly, turning toward the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to request that any assumptions based purely on appearance be stricken from the record. Judge Mason stared hard at Blake, then nodded. Granted, jury will disregard the witness's last comment. There was no jury yet. The hearing was preliminary, but the message was clear. Blake smirked and leaned back again like he couldn't care less. But under the surface, the first cracks had begun to show. Darius watched silently, calculating. His time was coming. And when it did, it would tear the whole damn room apart. Blake leaned into the microphone again, still lounging like he owned the room. Like I said, he drawled. He was lurking, acting like he had some kind of authority, getting in our way. Logan folded his arms across his chest. Getting in your way, how? Exactly. Blake shrugged, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Asking too many questions, demanding to see evidence, trying to boss us around. It's not how civilians are supposed to act. Logan caught the word immediately. He let it linger in the air. Civilian, he repeated slowly. You're certain that's what he was? Blake rolled his eyes. Look at him. I don't need a badge number to know trouble when I see it. Judge Mason's gavel cracked against the desk. Sheriff Blake, I've already warned you. Stick to objective facts or step down. Blake raised both hands in mock surrender but didn't look the least bit apologetic. Harris quickly stepped in, trying to steer the narrative back in his favor. Your Honor, it's clear from the testimony that the defendant was interfering with an ongoing investigation. Officers had reasonable suspicion to detain him. Logan stepped forward, voice calm but cutting. Reasonable suspicion based on race clothing. Standing too close. Harris bristled. Based on behavior. Behavior like asking for identification, requesting to see a search warrant. Logan shot back. That's not interfering. That's called knowing your rights. Blake huffed. Yeah. Well, knowing your rights doesn't mean you get to play cop. For the first time, Darius moved, just slightly. He straightened his posture, letting the chains clink softly, a sound that somehow cut sharper than any shout. Logan caught the motion out of the corner of his eye. He knew Darius was ready. The storm was building, and Blake was standing right in the center of it, smiling, clueless, with no idea how hard it was about to hit. Blake shifted in the witness chair, clearly feeling bolder. You know what the real problem is, he said loudly, looking straight at Judge Mason like daring her to stop him. Guys like him, They think just because they can string a few big words together, it makes them special. Logan stiffened, stepping closer to the bench. Your Honor. Judge Mason raised a hand. Sharp. Let him speak, she said, voice low but dangerous. Let him keep digging. Blake grinned wider, misreading her. You dress him up. Give him a fancy degree, maybe. But underneath, he pointed directly at Darius, his finger stabbing the air. Underneath, it's all the same. Anger, defiance, entitlement. The room went still. Even Harris shifted uncomfortably now. Darius didn't flinch. He stared at Blake, silent, letting the words slide off him like rain off stone. His calm was louder than any shout. Logan's hands balled into fists at his sides. His instinct was to lash back, but he caught Darius's slight shake of the head, a warning, a reminder. Not yet. Blake laughed under his breath, misinterpreting the silence as weakness. He thinks he's better than us, Blake said, shaking his head. But we know the truth. You can dress up a thug, but you can't change what he is. Judge Mason finally slammed the gavel down. Hard. Enough, she barked. Sheriff Blake, step down, now. Blake smirked, but rose slowly, dragging his feet like a child caught red-handed. As he passed Darius on the way back to his seat, he leaned in close and hissed under his breath, You're nothing. Always will be. Darius turned his head, locked eyes with him, and said, low enough that only Blake could hear, We'll see about that. Blake recoiled slightly, unsettled without understanding why. Something had shifted, something he couldn't quite name but would soon regret. Blake slouched back into his seat, arms crossed, tossing a cocky smirk at Harris like he'd already won. Judge Mason straightened in her chair. Defense. Your witness. Logan rose slowly, adjusting his sleeves with deliberate calm. His gaze flicked to Darius for half a second, reading the man's stillness, the control behind his silence. Then he turned to Blake, voice even. Tell me, Sheriff, Logan began. At any point did the defendant physically resist you? Blake snorted. He resisted by talking back. Talking back, Logan repeated. Words, Blake shrugged. Words can be threats. Did he threaten you? Logan pressed. Stepping closer, Blake hesitated just a fraction too long. Not exactly, he admitted finally, voice tight. He was aggressive. Logan tilted his head. Aggressive by asking you for your identification. Blake shifted in his seat. By his attitude, Logan didn't let up. His voice sharpened, slicing through the thick air of the courtroom. Is attitude illegal now? Sheriff, should we start locking up anyone who doesn't smile when they're handcuffed for no reason? A few murmurs rippled from the back of the courtroom. Harris cleared his throat loudly, trying to cut the tension. Objection argumentative. Overruled, Judge Mason said immediately, eyes never leaving Blake. Logan took a small step closer to the witness stand. Tell the court, Sheriff, he said quietly. If the defendant had been white, dressed the same way, saying the same words, would you have thrown him in cuffs? Blake opened his mouth, closed it, his jaw clenched. Across the room, Darius watched without blinking, silent, patient, waiting. Blake finally muttered, It's different. Logan's voice was barely above a whisper now, but it carried through the entire room. Different how? Blake said nothing. The silence screamed louder than any confession. Judge Mason's gavel came down hard. Enough games, she said. Mr. Logan, if your client has anything to say, Now's the time. The room shifted. Restless, Blake leaned forward, smirking. Harris folded his arms. Confident. Logan glanced at Darius, giving a subtle nod. Darius stood. The cuffs around his wrists clinked as he moved. But he stood tall, calm, deliberate. He took one step forward, facing the entire room. His voice, when it came, was steady, quiet, but it hit like a thunderclap. "My name is Darius Cole," he said. "I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words dropped like a bomb. Silence. Thick. Crippling. Blake's face twisted in confusion. Then disbelief. Bullshit. He muttered under his breath. Judge Mason's brow furrowed. Is this true? Before Darius could answer, the courtroom doors swung open. 2 agents in dark suits strode in. Flashing badges. One stepped forward, speaking clearly. "Your Honor, this is Director Darius Cole. We have documentation." He handed over a thick folder. Judge Mason skimmed the papers. Her face changed instantly from skepticism to something close to shock. This checks out," she said slowly. Harris's face drained of color. Blake half rose from his seat, then slumped back down. Stunned, Darius stayed perfectly still, his presence suddenly twice as large, twice as sharp. "I was at the scene," Darius said evenly, "because I was overseeing an internal investigation into corruption within local law enforcement." He let that hang. "You," he added, eyes locking onto Blake, "were part of that investigation." Blake's mouth opened, but no words came out. Darius turned to the judge. "I complied with all procedures. I identified myself verbally. I requested official documentation for the search being conducted. Instead, I was unlawfully detained and mocked for nothing more than the color of my skin." His voice didn't rise. He didn't need to shout. Every word struck like a hammer. Logan stood back, arms crossed, watching the walls crumble. Darius looked straight at Blake one last time, voice low and final. "You wanted to teach me a lesson." A pause. "Turns out, I'm the one teaching you." Blake bolted to his feet. This is some setup," he shouted, voice cracking. "I didn't know, no one told me who he was." Judge Mason's eyes narrowed. "Ignorance is no defense." "Sheriff." Blake's hands flailed. "He didn't show any badge. He didn't act like no FBI." Darius raised an eyebrow. "You expected a song and dance." Laughter rippled somewhere at the back of the courtroom. Blake's face flushed crimson. Harris jumped in, trying to salvage the disaster. "Your Honor, clearly this was a misunderstanding. If Mr. Cole had just properly identified himself, he did." Darius cut in, calm, precise. "I stated my identity. I requested documentation. Your officers laughed in my face, stripped me of my rights, and dragged me here like an animal." His words stabbed the room into silence. Judge Mason slammed the gavel once. Sharp. "Enough." She turned to Harris, voice icy. "You pursued charges against a federal director without a single piece of verified evidence." Harris stammered. I was misinformed." "By who?" Logan interjected smoothly, stepping forward. "Who fed you those lies?" Blake's eyes darted wildly. Harris froze. Cornered, Judge Mason's voice dropped. "Dangerous. I see now why the director himself had to investigate this department." Blake lunged toward the judge's bench. Desperate. "Please, Your Honor, this was a mistake. A misunderstanding." Darius didn't move. He simply said, in a voice like iron, "You didn't treat me like a mistake. You treated me like a target." Blake shrank back. Judge Mason straightened. her authority filling every corner of the room. "Effective immediately," she said. "Sheriff Blake is suspended pending a full investigation. Charges for unlawful detention, abuse of power, and racial discrimination will be filed." She turned to Harris. "As for you, counselor, I suggest you retain legal representation." Blake sagged in his seat. Broken, Harris stood frozen, like a man realizing he was already drowning. Logan let out a breath, smiling grimly. Across the room, Darius remained standing, unshaken, unmoved. The storm he had endured was nothing compared to the reckoning that had just begun. Blake stumbled as two court officers moved toward him. "You can't do this!" he barked, voice cracking. "I'm the sheriff here." Judge Mason didn't even blink. "Not anymore." The officers seized his arms. Blake jerked back instinctively. But there was no fight left in him. His face twisted between anger and fear. "You don't understand," Blake shouted, struggling against their grip. "I was following procedure. I didn't know who he was." "Because you didn't care to know," Darius said coldly from his place beside Logan. Blake turned to Darius, chest heaving. "You set me up." Darius didn't flinch. His voice was like steel. "You set yourself up the moment you judged a man by his skin instead of his badge." The officers hauled Blake toward the door. His boots scraped loudly across the tile, a sound that seemed to stretch forever. Some spectators turned their faces away, others stared, wide-eyed. At the prosecution table, Harris was pale, sweat glistening at his temples. He shot a desperate glance at Judge Mason. "Your Honor," he stammered. "If I may, there must be some consideration. Sheriff Blake acted rashly." "Yes, but—" Judge Mason cut him off, her voice sharper than a whip. "Spare me," she snapped. "You pursued baseless charges against a federal director. You mocked due process. You let bias guide your every step." Harris swallowed hard, his hands twitching at his sides. I acted on the reports provided," he said weakly. Logan stepped forward, voice slicing through the tension. "Reports written by Blake and his team." Silence fell. Judge Mason fixed Harris with a stare that could have cracked stone. "You will be investigated," she said coldly. "You are not above the law." Harris slumped back into his chair like the weight of the room had finally crushed him. Darius stood motionless, arms relaxed at his sides. But there was nothing relaxed about the way he watched them fall apart, one by one, exactly as he had expected, exactly as they deserved. Harris sat frozen, staring blankly at the table in front of him. His fingers twitched, fumbling with the edge of a legal pad he wasn't even writing on anymore. Logan watched him for a moment, then turned to Darius and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Funny thing about lies, isn't it? They always look strong until the truth walks in." Harris flinched, like the words physically struck him. Judge Mason set down the folder she had been reviewing with a heavy thud. "Counselor Harris," she said coolly, "consider yourself officially under internal review. You will surrender your credentials pending investigation." Harris opened his mouth, then closed it. His face collapsed inward, fear, shame, disbelief battling all at once. I didn't mean for it to get this far," he mumbled, barely audible. Darius stepped closer. His voice was low, steady. "You didn't mean for it to get caught." Harris's head dropped. He couldn't even look at him. Across the courtroom, Blake struggled against the two officers dragging him away. His voice cracked in panic now, stripped of all arrogance. "Please," Blake cried. "It was a mistake. I can make it right. Just give me a chance." Judge Mason didn't even glance at him. Her focus was locked onto the prosecutor slumped in defeat. You let prejudice cloud your judgment, she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. You let your office become a weapon against the very people you were sworn to protect. Harris squeezed his eyes shut, his shoulders sagging under the weight of her words. For the first time, the courtroom felt small, cramped, suffocating. No one dared move, no one dared speak. Only Darius stood calm in the eye of the storm. A quiet, unshakable reminder of every decision they had made and every price they would now pay. The reckoning was no longer coming. It was already here. Blake stumbled forward as the officers paused at the door. His voice cracked as he tried one last time. "Director Cole, please," he gasped. "I didn't mean it like that. It was just protocol. Just fear." Darius turned to face him. His expression was unreadable. Calm, steady. "Fear doesn't excuse injustice," Darius said quietly. "It never has." Blake's shoulders sagged. His lips moved, searching for words that wouldn't come. In that moment, all the swagger, all the arrogance, melted into something small and pitiful. The officers tightened their grip. Blake didn't resist this time. Across the room, Harris pushed himself shakily to his feet. His face was pale, his suit rumpled. I can cooperate," Harris stammered. "I'll assist with the investigation. I'll testify. Please, I have a family." Logan, standing beside Darius, scoffed under his breath. Darius didn't even glance at Logan. His focus stayed locked on Harris, his voice low but cutting. "You had a choice," Darius said. "You chose convenience over conscience." Harris dropped his gaze to the floor, shame flooding his features. Judge Mason rose slowly behind the bench. Her robe rustled softly, the only sound in the suffocating silence. "This courtroom will adjourn," she said firmly. "An official inquiry will commence immediately." The gavel struck once, hard. The officers moved Blake through the door. Harris followed, escorted separately, his steps dragging as though gravity itself fought against him, and Darius stood still, untouched by the chaos. The last man standing after the wreckage cleared. No anger, no gloating, just certainty. Certainty that justice, true justice, was finally moving again, and he had been the one to set it free.